Professor Oded Lifshitz from the Department of Archaeology and Ancient Near Eastern Cultures at Tel Aviv University is inviting you to join him to a journey following those who composed the historical descriptions in the Hebrew Bible.
The Untold Story of the Kingdom of Judah, Part C. Out of sight, out of mind, and far away in time. The Untold Stories of the Lowlands, the Shfela, and its history. Chapter 2. The Untold Story of the Elah Valley Clan. In this chapter, I will argue that the Elah Valley Clan lived and existed on its land for 1,100 years, starting from the beginning of the Middle Bronze Age around 1800 BCE until the destruction by Sennacherib, king of Assyria, in 701 BCE. For most of this long period, this clan was active in the geopolitical space of the local lowland cities between Gath, Ekron, Beth Shemesh and Lachish, and was not connected to the geopolitical system that developed in the hill country. The city that was established at Tel Azekah was the center of this clan, and for a long period in the second millennium BCE, it was a strong, rich, and fortified urban center. In one of the next chapters, I will suggest that the original name of the settlement at Tel Azekah was Moreshet, or Mukhrashtu, that is mentioned in a letter from the El Amarna archive, or Moreshet Gath, the hometown of the prophet Micah the Moreshtite, and that the kings of Judah gave the name Azekah to this place when they consolidated their rule over the Elah Valley Clan and of the urban center of this area not earlier than the early 8th century BCE. Sennacherib's campaign brought an end to the Elah Valley Clan and the city of Azekah. Much of the population that survived the campaign was exiled to Assyria, and others likely escaped, with some finding refuge in the Jerusalem area. Only after the Assyrian withdrawal from the region in the 630s BCE, during the days of King Josiah, could Judah return to control the lowlands in general and the Elah Valley in particular. The place became an important center in the kingdom's olive oil industry, and Azekah was rebuilt as an administrative center and a military fortress on the western border of Judah, where, for the first time, a population originating from the kingdom of Judah settled there. Among the settlers, perhaps, were the grandchildren of those who escaped from Azekah to Jerusalem during Sennacherib's campaign. Let's start from the beginning. In the late Bronze Age, in the second half of the second millennium BCE, and probably already in the Middle Bronze Age, in the first half of the second millennium BCE, the lowlands and the inner coastal plain were the most settled and densely populated areas in Canaan. The socio-political organization in the region was based on small tribal units organized on the basis of kinship between families living in the same region. Each of these clans existed within a defined geopolitical area, at the center of which was an urban center, which also served as the center of the economic, administrative, and social system, and apparently also as a cultic center of the clan. Azekah played an important role in this system, especially in the area between Beth Shemesh to the north and Lachish to the south, Ekron and Gath to the west, and the geopolitical players of the hill country to the east, that included the small urban centers of Shem, Jerusalem, and probably also Hebron. Azekah was one of the largest and most important cities in the entire region in the period before the Egyptian takeover in the middle of the second millennium BCE, and it continued to prosper even during the long period in which the Egyptian Empire ruled over Canaan. During the Middle Bronze Age, Azekah had complete control over the nearby area and intensive connections with the other cities in the lowlands, hill country, and coastal plains, especially with Ashkelon. At least three main stages of settlement from the Middle Bronze Age have been identified at the site, which are characterized by three different expressions of monumental construction. Indeed, the development of Azekah during this period may have been related to the prosperity of Ashkelon, its rise as the most important center in the south of Canaan, and its close trade ties with Egypt. Ashkelon's rise led to an increasing need for a constant supply of agricultural products, and a chain reaction arose in the local Canaanite economies, attracting merchants, artisans, farmers, and shepherds to take part in the growing economic opportunities found in the West. The city that existed in that period at Tel Azekah, which is Gath, seems to have been smaller than the one that existed in Tel Mikne, which is Ekron, to the north of it, but larger or similar in scope to the cities in Azekah and Lachish. The fortifications at Tel Azekah, Gath, were apparently constructed around the same as the date and the fortification in Azekah. The walls are technically remnants of each other and include similar components. These two cities were among the first to be fortified in the central lowlands, and the establishment of their fortifications preceded the fortifications that were built in Beth Shemesh, Tel Batash, biblical Timnah, Lachish, and Gezer. The Late Bronze Age is the most prominent period for Tel Azekah and remains dated to these various phases of this period were found in almost all the excavation areas. The settlement continued to develop during the 14th century BCE, what we call the Late Bronze Age 2A, and expanded beyond the fortified area at the top of the mount. The finds from this period are very rich and also include Cypriot and Mycenaean imports. These finds are very important for the analysis of the regional standing of Tel Azekah and for the purpose of understanding its relationship with the neighboring cities in the central lowland. According to the letters found at the El Amarna archive, Tel Azekah, Gath, the city of King Shuardata and his successor Abdi Ashtarti, was the ruling city-state in the region in the 14th century BCE. However, during the many years of excavations in the site, no settlement layers that can be clearly dated to this period were uncovered in Tel Azekah Gath, nor is it clear if any use was made of the Middle Bronze Age city walls that remained. The El Amarna letters are the only evidence of the importance and centrality of Gath in the 14th century BCE. On the other hand, Tel Azekah Gath, considerable remains were excavated dating to the 13th century BCE. The remains demonstrate that although this settlement continued to exist only in the upper hill, buildings of a public nature existed during this period alongside evidence of cultic activity at the site. Therefore, based on the archaeological findings, it appears that the centrality of Gath during the El Amarna period, the 14th century BCE, was not due to the strength of the city, its size, or the power of its rulers, but rather resulted from its rulers' ability to win the backing and support of the Egyptian government and from a strong alliance with the other tribal groups in the region. The Egyptians concentrated power in the hands of the few, who served as rulers of the important cities. Thus, Gezer, Gath, Lachish, and perhaps also Beth Shemesh should be seen as regional centers headed by charismatic leaders who took advantage of the political circumstances to gain power, even if only temporarily. In such a situation, we can assume that the heads of families and the leaders in Azekah might have taken part in the regional political system in an attempt to gain power and status, through switching their loyalties and building alliance with other clans and families in the region, and perhaps even through connections with families who were rivals of the ruling families in Gath itself. The archaeological findings reveal a deeper and more direct Egyptian involvement in Canaan during the long reign of Ramses II from 1290 to 1224 BCE, 13th century BCE, mainly through the establishment of small estates along the main streams in the southern coastal plain, the purpose of which was to produce agricultural products for the Egyptian government system, to be it royal or military or temples, without having to rely on the local city systems. Tel Azekah, Gath, and Azekah, along with other cities in the region, had to deal with this new reality. Excavations at these two sites indicate that both flourished simultaneously, although there is no evidence of either maintaining ties to the Egyptian administration, in contrast to the reality in layer 7 in Lachish, dated to the same time period. We might thus assume that Gath had been the dominant city in the area along the Elah stream, but during this period, when the Egyptians changed the way they controlled the cities of Canaan and transitioned to more direct control, it was Lachish that became their gateway to the lowlands and their main ally in the region. The late Bronze Age 3, which dates to the end of the 13th century and to the first half of the 12th century BCE, was a period of political instability in the southern coastal plain and the Shfela. This was the reason for Mer-Neftach's journey to Canaan, with Ashkelon and Gezer among his main destinations. Following this journey, Egyptian estates were established along the entire lands of the coastal plain. During this period, the conflicts between the Egyptians and the Sea peoples also began. Tel Azekah was abandoned in the late 13th century BCE, and it took half a century of gradual development until the site recovered and became the largest and most impressive Philistine city of the late Iron Age I and Iron Age IIa. Notably, no evidence was found at Tel Azekah, Gath, of destruction in the last third of the 12th century BCE, in sharp contrast to the fate of Azekah and Lachish of that time. In almost all the areas excavated at Tel Azekah, it became clear that the settlement continued to exist into the late Bronze Age 3, until it underwent a severe destruction towards the end of the 12th century BCE. From the area of pottery and the abundance of archaeological finds, many of which testify to great prosperity, developed trade relations, and high economic well-being, we can learn that Azekah was a large and prosperous city of the time before it was destroyed. Moreover, the many Egyptian objects found in the layer of destruction testify to direct contact and close relations with the sites associated with Egyptian that existed on the coastal plain to the west and to the south of Tel Azekah. These findings suggest that at a certain stage in the first half of the 12th century BCE, the regional balance of power changed. When the status of the settlement in Tel Azekah declined and weakened, the political and social circumstances also changed, enabling residents of Tel Azekah to forge an alliance with the elite in Lachish. The two sites show many similarities in their material culture during this period, and above all, they share a same bitter fate. We cannot know whether one of them was superior to the other, or if they were just two independent cities that enjoyed similar ties with the Egyptians. It does seem that when the Egyptians finally withdrew from the area in the last third of the 12th century BCE, Lachish and Azekah lost the patronage and support they had, and shortly afterwards both fell victim to heavy destruction by unknown force. As I proceed to explain, the most likely candidate for the cause of these destructions is the city of Ekron, which established its position and power in the region during this period. The settlement of Tel Azekah was never able to re-establish itself after this great destruction, which was final, cruel, and complete. Evidence of the destruction was discovered in all the excavation areas throughout the site, indicating the tragic end that came during this period. The mud brick walls collapsed, and buried under them the prosperous material culture that had existed until that moment. Valuables remained buried under the remains of the houses, and people were left lying in the ruins, buried under the landslides and burned into the severe fire that engulfed many of the buildings. No one came back to evacuate the belonging and the people. Azekah remained empty and abandoned for something like 200 years, with the remains of the destruction on the surface visible and exposed for all to see. Even when people returned to Azekah and rebuilt it after many years, in my opinion, those who had survived the terrible destruction and continued to live in small settlements in the Elah Valley and its surroundings, very close to the abandoned mound, built their houses among the ruins that remained right on the surface since the end of the late Bronze Age. Few remains were cleared and cleaned, and the houses were built almost at the same level, when only a few centimeters from those walls lay the remains of the ancient ruins. Where did the residents of Azekah who survived the destruction go? Where did they live during the 200 years in which the site remained ruined and uninhabited? And why did Azekah remain empty and uninhabited while small settlements were built in the surrounding area? This question can be answered by considering the geopolitical situation in the region. When the period in which a few cities dominated the socio-political system ended, and the regional center of Tel Mikne, Ekron, took over a large part of the lowlands and the inner coastal plain, instability returned to the region. Some of the cities were destroyed, and the population moved to live in the new sites that gradually grew in the lowlands and developed in late Iron Age 1. When Ekron began to weaken and its place was taken by Tel Azekah, Gath, which became the largest and most powerful city in the entire area, the small sites around the Elah Valley began to grow and develop. These sites are characterized by a round casement wall, and the best known example is Khirbet Kayafa, located only 1 kilometer to the east of Tel Azekah. The site of Nahal Nativ is another site of this type, located a little to the east of Khirbet Kayafa, and despite its smaller size, the site boasted an impressive, thick outer wall forming an enclosed settlement layout and had a room exhibiting a cultic function. In my opinion, these and other sites that developed simultaneously, exactly at the time when Azekah was empty, were new settlements of the same clan, the Elah Valley Clan, which was not allowed to return and settle the elevated mound of Azekah throughout the Iron Age 1 and most of the Iron Age 2A. As long as Gath was a strong Philistine city, it prohibited the existence of fortified settlements within the boundaries of its rule, mainly towards the east, where they faced the tribe of the hill country, which grew stronger exactly at that time. This was also the fate of Khirbet Kayafa, which, after a very short period of trying to build strong surrounding walls, was destroyed, abandoned, and never resettled. I argue that the origin of the people of Caiaphas is of the same Elah Valley clan, and perhaps its inhabitants were even the descendants of those who had escaped only 100 years earlier from the bitter fate of Azekah. The conclusions from all of the above is that during the periods when Tel Azekah Gath was a large and dominant settlement in terms of geopolitics, size, and demographic power, it controlled a vast area, including Azekah on its eastern border. Later, as Gath weakened, both during the Middle Bronze Age and probably also during the beginning and the end of the Late Bronze Age, the Elah Valley clan and its urban center in Azekah expanded to play a key role within the local geopolitical array of settlements. In contrast to Lachish, which due to its location traditionally maintained close relations with the hill country, mainly with the Hebron area, and thereby also with the center of the area around Jerusalem, and whose relative distance from Gath and Ekron protected it from the power of these cities and prevented them from interfering too much in Lachish connections with the surrounding areas. And in contrast to Beth Shemesh in the Nahal Sorek area, stream area, which was a direct route to Jerusalem and its rural surroundings, as long as Ekron didn't prevent these connections and didn't interfere with them, Azekah's connection to the hill country was not as natural as its connection to Tel Azekah Gath in the west, only 7 kilometers to the west of it. So the Elah Valley and the area of the central lowlands never maintained close connection to the hill country and was never part of Judah. Therefore, it is understandable why as early as in the 8th century BCE, descriptions can be found of the connections between Jerusalem and Beth Shemesh in the northern lowland and Lachish in the southern lowlands, while there is no evidence of Jerusalem's connections with Azekah, the Elah Valley, and the central lowlands. Thus, for example, King Amaziah, who ruled between 796 to 767 BCE, was defeated by Jehoash, the king of Israel, at Beth Shemesh, which belongs to Judah. I'm quoting from 2nd Book of Kings, chapter 14, verse 11. And the king himself was captured there, according to verse 13, because of a conspiracy against him, which may have resulted from his defeat to Israel. King Amaziah fled from Jerusalem to Lachish, where he was murdered, according to verse 19. The destruction of Gath by King Hazael of Aram-Damascus at the beginning of the last third of the 9th century BCE changed the geopolitical system, making possible for the first time the involvement of Judah in the central lowlands region and its control over the Elah Valley area. It can be assumed that from this point on, the relations between the Elah Valley clan and Jerusalem gradually developed throughout the 8th century BCE, yet only during the reign of King Azariah between 792 to 739 BCE, King Yotam, who ruled between 751 and 736 BCE, and King Ahaz, who started his rule in 736 BCE, did Judah base its rule over the Elah Valley clan, with the connections between Azekah and Jerusalem developing gradually over decades. I assume that this process was completed before 732 BCE, when Judah became an Assyrian vassal kingdom and probably could not expand its territory any further. As I argue in the next chapter, the name Azekah was given to this place only during the 8th century BCE, a testimony to the agricultural importance of the Elah Valley to the economy of Judah, as well as to the influence of the material culture characteristic of the hill country, which gradually expanded into the Elah Valley. However, the material culture of the Elah Valley influenced Judah more than the material culture of the hill country influenced the Elah Valley. Notable in this context is the typical production of local pottery in general and the production of the storage jars in particular, which soon became the official royal jars distributed throughout the kingdom. These jars were produced in the Elah Valley and came to comprise one of the main hallmarks of the administration and economy in Judah until the end of the 8th century BCE, the stamping of Lamelech, belonging to the king, impressions emerged on the handles of many of these jars produced in the Elah Valley in Soho. Even after Sennacherib's campaign, their production continued in the Elah Valley, most likely in the site of Tel Soho. As already discussed earlier, and as will be expanded on later, the lowlands suffered a severe blow through Sennacherib's campaign in 701 BCE. Most of the site, including Tel Azekah, were destroyed, abandoned, and cut off from the administration of the kingdom of Judah, while Ekron established its control over the area and its standing within it, utilizing the full potential of the area for the production of olive oil. The re-establishment of the settlement at Tel Azekah in the 630s BCE, immediately after the withdrawal of Assyrian control from the area, was part of the cancellation of the geopolitical arrangements that had been established back in the days of Sennacherib. In my opinion, this was the first time Judeans from the hill country settled in Azekah, and they built a well-fortified stronghold there which protected a sophisticated industry for the production of olive oil. Indeed, the olive press that was recently excavated in Azekah is one of the most elaborate that has been discovered from this era of the late Iron Age. During the reign of King Josiah, Judah seems to have taken advantage of the Assyrian retreat and decided to make the most of the area's economic potential centered on olive oil production. The renewal of the settlement in the lowlands in the last third of the 7th century BCE, under the rule of Judah in the time of Josiah, greatly affected the decrease in the scope of the settlement in Benjamin and around Jerusalem, the decrease in the importance of these areas to the economy of the kingdom and to the stamped jar administration in which agricultural products, especially olive oil, was collected. As mentioned, we might also be able to identify with this shift the origin of the population that settled in Azekah, as well as around Beth Shemesh and Lachish, who perhaps were the descendants of those who escaped from the lowlands to the hill country during Sennacherib's campaign. The finding of 41 rosette stamped jar handles, typical of the last decades of the kingdom of Judah, marks Azekah as a major administrative center of the kingdom, the third most important after Jerusalem and Ramat Rachel, offering also clear testimony to the importance of the olive oil production in the Elah Valley from the days of King Josiah until the Babylonian destruction. Notably, however, the restoration of the lowlands, now the Judean lowlands, for all intents and purposes, was only partial. Its population was greatly reduced compared to its high days a century earlier, and its fortifications and economy were a faint echo of the power that existed in their region before the destruction caused by the Assyrians. In sharp contrast to the strengths of the area in the 8th century BCE, at the end of the 7th century BCE, the settlement in the lowlands was ruled by individual administrative and military centers. Important sites such as Beit Shemesh, Tel Goded, and Tel Beit Mirsim were not resettled or were only partially and poorly resettled. Tel Lachish was no longer the main collection center for the stamped storage jars, but rather was apparently used as a central administrative and military center of the kingdom. We can summarize from the long history of Azekah and the Elah Valley that seemingly The local clan lived in the area and maintained its local traditions for about 1,100 years, from the beginning of the Middle Bronze Age around 1800 BCE until Sennacherib's campaign in 701 BCE. During the entire period, the Elah Valley Clan played an important role within the local geopolitical system, mainly in the shadow of Gath, Tel Azekah, maintaining a close connection to the fate of Lachish. The kingdom of Judah was not involved in the local system of the central lowlands, and I've suggested here that it began to rule this region in a gradual process that started sometime after the destruction of Gath towards the end of the 9th century BCE, but became more established in the first half of the 8th century BCE. However, that reality lasted for a short period, for no more than 100 years, until Sennacherib's campaign and the destruction of the Lowlands in 701 BC. The second period of Jerusalem's control over the area began after a gap of about 70 years, and immediately after the withdrawal of Assyria from the area in the 630s BCE. This period lasted of about 45 years and ended with the destruction of the kingdom of Judah by the Babylonian army in 586 BCE. During this period, for the first time, a Judean population which had arrived from the area of Benjamin and Jerusalem, in the rural area around Jerusalem, some of whom might have been the descendants of those who fled to these areas after the Assyrian campaign of 701 BCE, came to settle in Azekah and established a fortified citadel in the northern part of the hill with an industrial system for the production of olive oil as its key enterprise. All the known traditions that prevailed on the site throughout most of its years of existence changed at once, and it seems that the new people who lived there at the end of the Iron Age were not aware of the long history of the place. They built a citadel in the northern part of the mount, far from the traditional Acropolis, probably at a site that was flat and easy to settle, removed from the remains of the destruction left by the Assyrian military campaign of 701 BCE, and with a good control of the roads and the junction at the foot of the mound. In light of this reality, according to which Azekah was connected to Judah for 2 very short periods of time, which included about 100 years of control over the local clan in the 8th century BCE and about 45 years of the presence of a small Judean population in the area in the last decades of the kingdom of Judah, right before the Babylonian destruction, we might ask, to what extent can this area be called the lowlands of Judah? Or in contrast, to what extent it is an area that preserved Canaanite traditions, which was ruled by Judah for only a short period of time? Did the residents of Azekah and the lowlands consider themselves a part of Judah? Were they familiar with the cult and belief system in Jerusalem and the concept and opinions that prevailed in the temple and its surroundings up there in the hill of Jerusalem? Or rather, did they maintain the Canaanite traditions and feel distinct and separate from the inhabitants of the hill country? I think that these are the questions with which researchers should return to the biblical text and the historical reconstructions. We should not accept at face value the biblical descriptions written during the short period when the Shephelah has indeed part of Judah, and think of them as reflecting the history of this region in other period. In this context, it is interesting to reconsider the role of Azekah in the various traditions preserved in the Hebrew Bible, to inquire into how the kings of Jerusalem saw the Elah Valley Clan and the relationship between this area and the hill country, as well as to examine the affiliation of this area to the Judean tribes vis-a-vis the province of Idumea that developed south of Azekah during the Persian and Hellenistic periods. We'll continue about it in the next chapter.